In a secluded hut in Shellwood, Hornet can encounter a mysterious being called Greyroot. Greyroot speaks cryptically and at one point deceives Hornet, leaving the latter cursed. Though Greyroot is not a bug and is parasitic in nature, certain clues allow speculation about what kind of creature they are. Since Greyroot has root in their name, players have questioned whether they might be the same type of being as the White Lady. Besides being root-like, the two share some other similarities, such as a desire to propagate themselves. It's been theorized that Greenpath's declining state may have something to do with the White Lady absorbing the land's energy and nutrients in order to produce her plentiful offspring. However, Greyroot does not have branches on their head like the White Lady, and Greyroot seems to reproduce by inserting a twisted bud into a host shell, whereas the White Lady lays eggs. These things considered, I'm inclined to say that Greyroot is not the same type of being as the White Lady, and likely not a higher being either. Hornet can meet Greyroot as soon as she reaches Shellwood. When Hornet approaches, Greyroot appears to have been sleeping. If Hornet does her challenge act where she brandishes her needle and utters a battle cry, Greyroot hides in response until Hornet walks away. Hornet observes that Greyroot is something other than a bug. Greyroot says that many bugs used to walk by their home but no longer do so, likely due to the haunting, in addition to other reasons which later become clear. The first thing Greyroot asks Hornet to do is fulfill the rite of the polyp wish, which involves Hornet collecting 6 polyp hearts. The inventory and materium description of a polyp heart says it is the core of a flower formed around the body of a consumed wood wasp, and that it secretes a sticky substance that the wasps subsist on. It seems that the flowers which the polyp hearts come from both feed wood wasps and feed off of them. Upon completing the wish, Hornet is given the polyp pouch blue tool, which Greyroot calls the refuse of the rite. If Hornet enters bile water through the citadel, she can find an area filled with roots that resemble Greyroot, one of which is attached to a cradle-like fixture which holds the twisted bud. The bud can be heard crying from a distance, though the needle-in quiets it while played. Once Hornet picks up the twisted bud, its crying can be heard every time the menu is open, even on tabs other than the inventory. If selected in that tab, the bud writhes and cries louder. If Hornet speaks to Pavo while carrying the bud, he identifies it and tells Hornet of other bugs bringing similar crying buds to Shellwood, though none return to Bellheart after doing so. Once Hornet brings the bud to Greyroot, Greyroot mentions the rite of rebirth, which becomes a wish they ask of Hornet. If Hornet accepts the wish, she asks what she must do in order to grant it, upon which Greyroot attacks her, trapping Hornet in place and forcibly inserting the twisted bud into her shell. Hornet later wakes up tangled in hardened roots in the chapel of the witch elsewhere in Shellwood, surrounded by the bodies of other bugs which have been turned to wood. If Hornet returns to Greyroot's hut, they too have been petrified and can no longer be interacted with. The presence of the parasitic twisted bud within Hornet's shell leaves her cursed. Her silk capacity is limited, and her crest becomes the curse crest, which cannot be changed and doesn't allow for the equipping of any tools. Even the Vesta crest becomes inaccessible to her. If Hornet tries to use bind while cursed, roots will come out of her shell and stop the bind from taking place. A similar effect happens if Hornet attempts to claim a new crest. The appearance of Hornet's death cocoon is altered, now having roots wrapped around it, and any silk eater that consumes the cocoon will itself be consumed by roots. Multiple NPCs notice the curse, and the snail shamans refuse to conduct the ritual which allows Hornet to obtain the Everbloom if she is cursed. Hornet notes that she can feel the parasite leeching off her strength. She doesn't think it will kill her quickly, but suspects that it could do so in time, and she must concentrate her own will to keep it from growing faster and taking over her shell completely. If Hornet is captured by a wardenfly while cursed, roots will emerge from her shell and kill the enemy, and if Hornet attempts to dive into the void with the Everbloom, roots sprout which prevent her from doing so. The parasite seems to be doing these things in order to protect itself rather than Hornet, because as far as it's concerned, Hornet's shell is now its shell, which is also implied by some of Greyroot's dialogue. If the parasite were to feed off of Hornet for long enough, it would presumably discard her shell, which would then become petrified like the others in the Chapel of the Witch. This can be directly observed in the Twisted Child ending, which takes place if Hornet defeats Grandmother Silk without the parasite first having been removed. The parasite appears to exit Hornet's shell and instead take control of Grandmother Silk, likely sensing that the latter is a much more powerful being. The cradle is then shown to have been filled with petrified roots, Hornet herself petrified among them. An egg-like piece of the roots then cracks open, and the cry of the newly produced creature is heard before the screen fades to black. Since Greyroot lives in Shellwood, why is the twisted bud found in bile water, and why does Greyroot speak of the polyp rite as though it's connected to the rite of rebirth? It could be that Greyroot's body truly stretches all the way to bile water, and the twisted bud is their offspring. It's also possible that Greyroot convinced or influenced some bugs they'd previously encountered to plant some kind of seeds which would eventually grow into the buds elsewhere in Farloom, where those servants would later find the buds and bring them to Greyroot, upon which the servants would be made into hosts. The Chapel of the Witch may have been constructed in Greyroot's honor by bugs who chose to participate in their rituals. The roots that produce the buds may simply grow on their own without being placed or planted first. Since the polyps consume wood wasps, perhaps feeding them to a bud enhances its parasitic abilities, or Greyroot consumes the polyps to enhance their own parasitic nature before placing the bud inside its new host. The twisted bud is referred to in the game's files as a mandrake, the name of a real-life parasitic plant with folklore about it having the ability to cry like a human infant. Whatever species Greyroot and the twisted bud belong to, the so-called rite of rebirth seems to be how they mature and ultimately reproduce. The growth of a bud into an adult requires a host, and the adult which inserts the bud into the host becomes petrified after transferring its strength and energy to the new bud. Bugs likely stopped coming to Greyroot's hut not solely because of the haunting, but also due to rumors being spread about bugs who bring crying buds to Shellwood never being seen again. Through Hornet's persistence, however, she can stop the same fate from befalling her, instead seeking help to transform the parasite into the Witch Crest, whose power she can claim and use for herself. What do you think of Greyroot? Do you believe there's any connection to the White Lady? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. I find discussing Silksong's lore to be very stimulating, and if you share the feeling, consider subscribing to the channel. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.